can't wait.
I got out the car and was just about to come. I was like,
I know. I didn't. Well, I didn't realize it until you texted me.
yeah.
Well, you know, we was on the move. We went to.
I gotta get some out the car.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Miss Helen. Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay. Oh, it's an honor to meet you. Will we be together on Friday? I'm just so grateful for everything you're doing, SRQ Strong. You all are truly, truly amazing. An inspiration to us all. Truly. Oh, I'm humbled by that. Oh, that's where you, is that where you, which part of Missouri? Hail from, that's right. The great state of Missouri. Is that where you say Missouri? Uh-huh. I know. Okay. Which part? Yeah, well, I'm very familiar. Reconciliation services. Yeah, I don't know if you know, on 31st and Truth out there. Uh-huh. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sure, I know. Yeah. Oh, God bless you. How wonderful. Oh, yeah. 6 years. It's nice, huh? Oh, they are. Because, you know, yesterday they got to go to the beach. And today, earlier, we all took a boat ride. That was just wonderful. You know, it was just wonderful. So I'm grateful for Betsy for, you know, bringing them all, letting the kids come too. And that's really quite a blessing. You know, plus when we left Pittsburgh, it was a snowstorm. So I was like, this is perfect. This is perfect.
recognize you though.
Yeah, sure. Yes, of course. Yes, for sure. Yes. Oh, how wonderful. God bless you. Oh, right, I got it. I got it. I got it.
Yeah, I'm looking for Betsy trying to get her. So we're going to do it from here. Testing. She wants something.
Good evening.
It was loud. Okay. Hi, everyone, and we want to welcome you from SRQ Strong. I'm Helen Neal,
And I'm Betsy Friedman.
and together we are honored that we are your MCs tonight.
You can tell because we match, right? So before we get started, if you didn't notice, the bathrooms were in the walkway as you came in tonight. Feel free to use them as you need them. There are Father Paul's books for sale outside. All through the night they'll be there, and you can pick one up after the event as well if you'd like. We're going to be a little bit more informal here. We are so happy that you took time out of this gorgeous spring break day to come and be with us tonight. Thank you. We will have Andy Blanche talk to you a little bit about what SRQ Strong is up to. We will have Walter Gilbert introduce Father Paul. Father Paul will speak to us. And then we'll come back together to learn about some next steps and have a rousing finish. So please stay to the end if you can.
Let's get ourselves centered so that we are truly ready to listen and engage. Are you ready? Okay, with all that is to come tonight. So much has happened since Father Paul joined us on February 26, 2020, when he asked us to consider these questions. What does it mean to have a voice? What does it mean to be heard? What does our love look like in ways that we build true, did you hear that word? True community. We've had lots of opportunities to test our answers over the past 4 years as our larger community, city, state, and country have been divided. COVID-19, the pandemic or the flu, the post-George Floyd protests against racism or riots by looting thugs, Hurricane Ian imparted images of public trucks with American flags, a family sitting in makeshift school shelters contemplating how to start all over again. Freedom and rights for those with the loudest voice, a love and responsibilities for even the least of these, our brethren. Meanwhile, despite all this, all of us here in this room have focused our love, built programs that honored the voices of those most needing to be heard, and one of us who has been doing this work is Sarasota Strong's own founding member, Andy Blanche. I will turn it over to Andy.
Hi, everybody. I am Andy Blanche, and I am so thrilled to see you all here today. The trajectory for this evening, and actually the trajectory for the whole week, is to help us move from where we are today into the future. And as we were getting ready for this event, we were thinking a lot about the vision that Betsy and Helen just put out there. And we realized that if we're really serious about hearing and honoring the voice of every person who lives in our community, that work can't be done by one organization or by a dozen organizations. Every group, every institution, and every individual in this community has a role to play and has a unique gift to give to that process. So that's kind of one of the things we hope to come out of this whole process, is to expand the circle of people who see this as important. So what we did is we convened a very small group of people representing vastly different organizations to do some brainstorming. And the first thing they did was to name the effort Catalyst. Because that's what this is all about, right? Every single one of us can be a catalyst for change. And the second thing they did was to put out a little survey into the community and ask any organization or group that was doing this work or was interested in getting involved to just kind of sign on and say, yes, we do care, we do want to support the development of a trauma-informed, resilient community. And if you've been looking at the slides, I think they've been rotating around. There is a list of current Catalyst organizations on one of those slides. And in just a very short couple of weeks, almost 50 organizations have signed on. Yeah, exactly. Amazing. And they keep coming more every day. And you know, we've heard from housing programs actually helping people create real homes. We've heard from churches where congregants are leading healing circles. We've heard from yoga studios who get it that often trauma healing starts in the body. We've heard from community health workers who spent the entire 2 years of COVID in the streets, helping people stay safe. We've heard from, what else have we heard from? Professional artists and trauma survivors who are sharing their experiences and making art together. This is great stuff. Mental health agencies in this community who are making sure that the most vulnerable and the most overlooked children and youth in our community actually get access to the services and supports that they need. There's some amazing work going out there. We also heard from what very well may be the only trauma-informed ballet company in the world. I mean, this is all in Sarasota, guys. This is amazing, and there's been so much else. So it's clear that we do have a long way yet to go, but we wanted to start off tonight by taking just a minute to honor and celebrate the amazing work that we know already is happening. And for that, I'm going to turn this back to Betsy and Helen.
Thank you. So it's really important to start where we are, right? So I get to read out the names of all of the organizations who've decided to sign up and be part of the Catalyst organizations. So if you've ever had contact with one of these organizations in any way, maybe you're a donor, maybe you're a volunteer, maybe you're a staff member, maybe you're a board member, maybe you just went to a great performance, would you please stand up and take a round of applause as I read out the organization that you have some sort of affiliation with? The Academy at Glengarry, the Academy at Bradenton, All-Star Children's Foundation. Stay standing, stay standing. Also Youth, Azara Ballet, Bethel Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, Centerstone, Community Assisted Supported Living, Community Bible Church, hi Pastor Joe, hi Sharon, Dragonfly Mental Health, the Early Learning Coalition of Sarasota County, Equality Florida, Fabulous Arts Foundation, Family of God United Methodist Church, First 1000 Days Suncoast, 40 Carrots Family Center, Gulf Coast Community Foundation, Harvest House, Healthy Teens, Herrera Psychology, Hope DeSoto, Long-Term Recovery Group, Ingar Yoga Sarasota, Lee and Bob Peterson, Sunshine from Darkness, More to Life, NAMI Sarasota and Manatee Counties, Park East Community Association, Peace Education and Action Center, Resilient Retreat, Safe Children Coalition, Samaritan Counseling Services of the Gulf Coast, Sarasota Contemporary Dance, Sarasota Housing Authority, SEA Alliance, Soul to Soul Yoga, All Ages Therapy Services, Spaces Art Gallery and Studios, SRQ Strong, Suncoast Partnership to End Homelessness, Suncoast Psychodrama Trauma Training, the Florida Center for Early Childhood, Glasser Schoenbaum Human Services Center, the Multicultural Health Institute, Theater for Social Justice, Truly Valued, Visible Men Academy, and WSLR Fogartyville. Welcome one and all. Thank you all for being here.
Don't sit down yet. Don't sit down yet. We got some more standards. Lots of organizations and individuals have been part of a trauma-informed learning collaborative, have attended training events and workshops and conferences. If you have been part of any kind of trauma training, please stand and stay standing. And, all right. And our local journalists and media outlets have picked up the topic. Anyone who has written or read or produced or watched one of the stories, please stand and stay standing. And finally, our strength lies in our connections with each other. Any of you who are still seated, who have helped a friend or a family member or a colleague get through a hard patch, please stand.
Don't sit down, because I want to introduce a man who, if you don't know him, you should get to know him. This is Walter Gilbert, who has worked tirelessly for decades to make our community a true community. Walter's going to come up and introduce Father Paul. Walter? You can sit down now, thank you.
Good evening. Thanks everybody for coming out. As Betsy said, it's Tuesday in Florida, spring break. We all got somewhere else we probably could be. Plenty of things going on around here. But thank you too for coming out. My job is to introduce a young man who I met 2020. We spent a short amount of time together, and I was thoroughly impressed with the program that he started in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was even more impressed that he was a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. That's why I really like him. But we talked a little during that first visit, and I think we did a couple phone calls after. And I saw his program as something that could be worked or established here in our community. Pittsburgh and Sarasota, two different places for a whole lot of different reasons. But the program itself is something that all communities could use and benefit from. So this trip, I took him for a ride. I took him for a ride in our community. And I took him and showed him the things that were different and the things that wasn't. And we agreed that his program could work here with a little Southern home cooking. So we're in the process of working that out. But I got to know him, and I got to know him as a young man who is not only a father of the cloth, but a father of kids and a father of people, if you can get where I'm coming from. He has an understanding that, quite frankly, a lot of people in his age grouping does not have. He's wise beyond his time. I'm not going to go into his biography. I'll let him explain some of the things he's done and where he came from and how that happened. But he's a tremendous young man on a mission, and it's a mission of peace and love. And that's what's needed to do what all of us in here are doing. And I watched the people standing up from the different segments or organizations that they're involved in. And I know if you guys are involved in those type of organization and activities, you know what I'm talking about when I say peace and love. So without any deeper, I'm not going to tell no secrets. Bio on the young man. Father Paul, you want to come forward? Thank you.
Yeah. Good evening. To my dear friend, Mr. Walter Gilbert, I cannot thank you enough for your friendship and for the journey you've taken me through. Truly, I carry you in my heart, and all of the good people in Newtown, all of the good people from Sarasota. I want to thank Andy and Miss Helen and Betsy and Carrie, who I don't think she's with us. Oh, is she here? Oh, where? Oh, typing. You know, I love you all dearly, and I consider you all truly as my family in the truest sense of the word. To all the rest of you, it's a joy and honor, a blessing to be here in Sarasota. It's a kind of homecoming. for me and my family. And not just because we have built such warm and wonderful relationships here in Sarasota, but because I too have a Florida story. My grandmother was from Florida. My grandmother was born in Tallahassee. Last night, my auntie, who lives in New York City, sent me a message. And she wanted me to remember my Florida roots. She sent me a message to remind me that my grandmother was the granddaughter of my great-great-grandmother, who was a proud and strong woman, a good woman, a woman of God, a woman who wanted to do everything she could to provide for her family and care for her people. She told me to remember my great-great-grandmother, who she described as a slave. Not a slave probably in the sense of slavery before 1865, but the sense of a slave that in the Jim Crow South had no real options. She told me, remember your great-great-grandmother who was taken advantage of by a white Florida senator who produced my great-grandfather, who was the father of my grandmother. Know your heritage, nephew, she told me. She went on to tell me that when my grandmother escaped Tallahassee with 4 children from an abusive relationship to Harlem, where she would become a singer. Indeed, music's in my family. My auntie who's telling me this was in Mercedes Ladies, who has the claim to fame to be the first all-female R&B group known to history. Remember your heritage, nephew, she tells me. And in this narrative, she did not tell me to remember my grandmother or my great-grandfather or my great-great-grandmother as victims. I stand before you not as a product of trauma as much as I am a product of resilience. It has astounded me. It has astounded me over my years in this field how many people want to come and teach us about resilience and abuse the word. I think sometimes people speak of resilience and have no resilience of their own. You're coming to me, and I'm going to tell you about my grandmother from Tallahassee and my great-grandfather and my great-great-grandmother. I'm going to tell you about our Florida roots and how we overcame the greatest of obstacles. I'm going to tell you how we praised God every step of the way and went north and made a way for ourselves so that now my children have a brighter future than even I did. I'm going to tell you that we know something of resilience. I found my people to be a people of wisdom, a people of courage, a people of strength, a people of faith, and how easily that narrative is skewed. It is good to come home to Florida, for my roots are here. Community. This is another word I think is greatly abused. People talk about community and they say, Father, we're going to have a community meeting. Father, you've got to get the community together. Father, we need to do something in the community. It is quite often the case that I wonder, is there any community even to speak of? We have lost the sense of community. What it truly means, I think we're describing some sort of conglomerate, some masses, but we don't understand community always what it means in the truest sense. The root of the word community, coming together with a gift. Now, if that indeed is the case, I think that presumes that everyone coming together has a gift to give. And yet sometimes that's not honored, that's not recognized. We don't organize community in that sense. Community, I believe, also presumes harmony. Sometimes we prefer peace. This understanding of peace is merely the absence of violence. But what about the presence of harmony? And yet we cannot talk about harmony without understanding the incredibly complex histories that we all have. Now, in my own personal story, you might say there's a lot of trauma that perhaps my family experienced down here in Florida, and even going north, more trauma there. And yet, I can't help but think about the trauma that is experienced by those who perpetrated those acts, that were always lurking there beneath the surface of Floridian culture. What kind of impact has that had on their descendants? I can tell you what the impact was on us, but what kind of impact was on their descendants? And yet we remain committed to building a sense of community. Now, and I want to say a word about the current state in which we find ourselves. There's a lot of turmoil in our nation, our beloved and beleaguered nation. There's a lot of turmoil in our nation. People are sometimes asking me how to be a good ally. I was asked that question by a very educated young man just last week. How can we be a good ally? Now, people describe themselves now as allies, and I find this very problematic. I think of allies, it reminds me of the words Malcolm X. He used this one-time description. He said, I don't trust the government because the government told us in World War II we ought to hate the Germans and the Japanese and love the Chinese and the Russians. And then when the war ended, the same government told us we had to love the Germans and the Japanese and hate the Chinese and the Russians. And this, to me, is the perfect description of allies. An ally is one in whom you are in league with as long as it is politically expedient. We don't want allies. Our ancestors talked not about allies, they talked about brothers and sisters. Why are we not talking about being brothers and sisters? We don't want your allyship. We want your fraternity. We want your sorority. We don't want allyship. We want family, because this is how we ought to be with one another. Indeed, this is the core of community. I love in the Arabic language whenever you say you are welcome. Ahla wa sahla, they say. And what it means is ahla, family, sahla, easy. It means we easily become family. You are welcome here. Here, we will easily become family. If we do not return to this understanding, we will have indeed great challenges in our attempts to build community. Now, it's important to understand that community is necessary for us all. In the United States, we're in a very challenging time in terms of our sense of community beyond communities which we would describe as trauma-affected communities. There's trauma in every community. And I hear people often say that there's trauma in every community. Trauma is the great equalizer, and yet there's not the same levels of trauma in every community. We have to acknowledge that, and that's where we have to begin. But yet, if we talk about the kind of challenges that we face with communities of disproportionate trauma, even if we go beyond that, we know that we're living in an age of disconnect. Some time ago, I received an invitation in Pittsburgh to talk with the Surgeon General, the United States Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, and at that particular time, I thought that I was receiving the invitation because he had an interest in some of our public health work, like so many of you were involved with community health workers and whatnot during COVID. I know we had been known for that at that time. I thought that was the nature of the invitation, and yet, when I was with him, I was astonished to find that his primary concern was the impact of connection on health. 2 weeks after that visit, he issued a Surgeon General warning declaring loneliness an epidemic in the United States. This is not a problem that is just reserved for communities that are underserved or with disproportionate impact of trauma. This is indeed a significant American problem. We see this now exacerbating polarization in our country, where everyone seems to be on some kind of crusade. And I don't care if you're talking about the left or if you're talking about the right. Everyone is doing their work, determined to strike down evil on the other side, blind to the very evil they themselves propagate. There is a need for belonging. And belonging, brothers and sisters, is resilience. These relationships is where our resilience begins. It's interesting if you really think about, well, what really is resilience? So Much of it we would describe as resources, and yet resources don't simply appear. My children like watching sometimes these video games. Mario Kart, and he jumps through the air and grabs these resources, and this is just not how it is. Because in real life, resources flow through relationships. Not every community has those kind of relationships. And we mustn't believe that those relationships are simply going to happen, like they are automatic, like they are presumed, like they are merely organic. Relations are intentional, and even in cultures around the world, cultures are very suited to developing relations. They give a framework for how to establish relations, how to maintain relations, how to achieve justice in relations. There's usually cultural framework around that. And yet we now, in this particular day and age, don't have that so much. This is where we have to look at social capital, this notion of social capital. And we have some people who have a deficiency in social capital. If I may define social capital as that social capital relates to the ways in which human beings interact and work together. So building social capital means improving the way humans interact, collaborate, and cooperate. How is it that we are improving the ways community members interact, collaborate, and cooperate? Well, I'll tell you, I've been in many community meetings where the whole point of the community meeting is to strike somebody down. One of my, I think, most famous introductions was in one such community meeting, where a woman introducing me back home in Pittsburgh said, "Last week, y'all got out of hand. And if you do that again, I'm going to drop the hammer on you." Now, without further ado, Father Paul. I thought maybe this isn't the best way to foster collaboration. What kind of environment are we in? And yet I also understood that introduction was in the wake of many generations of trauma. That trauma impacts meetings, that trauma impacts community gatherings, that trauma impacts the way in which we come together and try to interact with one another. And trauma separates us from one another. And with this separation, this kind of radical isolation, which is kind of reinforced by this foolish notion of individualism, as like we can do anything, as though we can do anything as a mere individual, reinforced by this foolish notion of individualism. It can be very difficult to cooperate. Trauma that we find in community is not just about the personal experience of trauma. I want to talk about community trauma. Now, when we started to do this work, a lot of the literature discussing community trauma defined it as these kind of big traumatic events that would happen in communities where everybody would experience them all together. And yet, what about this notion of this layering of trauma? This idea that it's not just one hurricane that comes through and hits this one community all in the same time, but there are some communities who experience these little hurricanes every single day. There's one woman I know, and she came to me, and she said, "Father, my son has been shot. It's hard," she said, "because my brothers were also shot, killed. It's hard because my father was also shot and killed." She had 7 from her nuclear family who had been shot. It's hard, she said. And I want to tell you that when something like that happens, it ripples through the community. And yet there are some who have grown so numb to this reality every single day. And one of the ways in which we approach this as community is we approach this as well, it's just normal for those people over there. It's just a norm that we accept for these communities. If it were to happen, though, in this community, we would never accept it. But a norm in this community, it's their normal, it is okay, we accept it. There's something wrong. The death in this community is acceptable, and death in this community is unacceptable. There is not this equal value of life in our society. There is not. And we are all responsible for that. And we cannot underestimate how powerful it is when these incidents happen day in and day out. People might not see it, but they hear about it. People might not have their relatives shot, but it affects their relatives. It is if we go and we see in the funeral home one young black man lying in the casket, is all of them. We see our children in their faces. But it doesn't keep everyone awake at night. I know this. And this is community trauma. It ripples through the community and it shatters community. It shatters a sense of self. It destroys and undermines the community narrative. It hijacks the community story. It hijacks the community identity. And the worst part of it, I think, is that violence springs from violence. Now, a word on violence. It is an American problem. We are a violent people. I remember one man said to me once, well, you know, America, this is a violent country. And you want to talk about violence in our communities, we can talk about school shootings. We can talk about shootings in movie theaters. We can talk about mass shootings here and there. And we have more mass shootings sometimes than days in the year. America is a violent community. But what about if we talk about the violence beyond guns? What about we talk about structural violence? What if we talk about policy that is violent? What if we talk about the words that we use that are violent? Violence is everywhere present in our culture, and it is impacting our communities. We don't just have a gun problem, we have a gun culture. We don't just have a problem with violence, we have a violent culture. And this impacts the way in which we try to resolve some of the very challenges that are the greatest among us. And herein lies the great problem with us as Americans, that usually we try to resolve our issues on the battlefield or in the courtroom. This is incredibly challenging. Believe me, I hail from Pennsylvania, and we have, of course, this great national treasure of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania. And just to go there and to see in 3 days 50,000 casualties, a number of them from Florida. Did it have to come to all that to free the slaves? But this is our way. We get more civilized and take it to the courts, but this is our way. And yet we, unlike some other nations in the world, have not had our truth and reconciliation movement here in this country. Now, I want to tell you that the Southern Christian Leadership Conference told us to refrain from the violence of fist, tongue, or heart. It's not enough simply not to strike somebody, but sometimes we have violence on our lips. Sometimes that violence is on our lips when we are trying to do something in behalf of, quote unquote, the underserved, in behalf of, quote unquote, the traumatized people. Sometimes with our violence, we are fueling more violence, a violent response, thus further putting pressure, more pressure, further pressure on the very people we are trying to help. This kind of violence that we carry in our hearts, these violent attitudes that we have towards one another, the separation, the polarization that that exists. And yet, W.E.B. Du Bois, in his book Souls of Black Folk, he wrote about the failed Reconstruction, the failure of the Freedmen's Bureau. Why did the Freedmen's Bureau fail? Of course, we know the Freedmen's Bureau, I'm sure, was down in Florida as well. The Freedmen's Bureau was in charge of integrating these newly freed slaves into American society upon the end of the Civil War, the Freedmen's Bureau. And what he said very, very fascinatingly was this: the Freedmen's Bureau spent too much time trying to put the bottom rail on top instead of trying to foster the goodwill between the Negro and the white man. I see so many people trying to put the bottom rail on top instead of fostering goodwill between us all. This radical shift in attitudes, this commitment towards reconciliation, has to be a key component of our trauma-informed work in community. We must acknowledge that at this particular point, there has been too much trauma in our communities to ignore. This trauma has characterized life. This trauma has shaped worldviews. This trauma is coloring interactions. This trauma is fueling violent speech. This kind of trauma is too prevalent for us to ignore. We need to heal from it, and we cannot heal, brothers and sisters, unless we maintain this radical commitment to reconciliation. Now, what has reconciliation to do with justice? Now, here I'm talking about what are the things that we should stand for. Forgive me, I'm going to say a word on anti-racist. Here's what I hear when I hear anti-racist. This is what I think. I know what you're against when you say that, but I do not know what you're for. What are you for? You're anti-racist, but what are you pro? What is your guiding values and principles? We know what you're trying to strike down, but what are you trying to build? It becomes necessary in this regard to set forth in a virtuous way the kind of values and commitments to know what we are for, to work towards not tearing down, but building up. We know that there are demons in our closets, that there is darkness in our corners. We, of course, must address those, and yet we have to understand that it is together, by building relationships with one another, it is with community, in community, that we're going to heal and address these demons in our past. So this notion of reconciliation is absolutely tied to justice. If I can again reference the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, wherein at that time our ancestors said, seek justice and reconciliation, not victory. So often it just becomes about victory. But what does it mean to seek justice and reconciliation? Well, I want to say a word about justice, if I may. A really nice reflection on justice from one particular Jesuit priest by the name of Robert John Arahu, and this is what he writes on justice and how we ought to understand justice. While many may consider that they are due or owed something because it is just, justice, be it social, communicative, retributive, cannot be properly understood without taking account of individuals in a context that brings each into relationship with others. That brings each into relationship with others. This is, now he's starting to say, how should we understand justice? Not just about winning, not just about getting something back, but what does it mean to bring us into relations with others? In essence, then, justice is relational. Now, this pains me because people talk about justice, they talk about social justice, they talk about we want to see justice in the courts, justice in the in the correction system, whatever the case might be, but what about this understanding that justice is relational? Justice can be understood only when those who claim something because it is just are considered in relation to the others who may have concern or involvement with the issue that raises the question of whether something is just. That is, justice cannot be understood without considering it the proper, correct, and fitting relation between individuals whose respective interests over some particular matter are in conflict. Now introducing reconciliation. And herein lies the reason why reconciliation has always got to be a sister of justice. Because if justice is relational, if justice is restoring relations as they should be, then reconciliation has to be the pathway to right relationship. And who is doing this work? We are not going to have healing unless we commit to this kind of reconciliation that leads to right relations with one another. And we cannot define that for ourselves. This is where we must come together with communities that have been inundated with trauma to understand how they understand their relationship between us to have been fractured. My aunt, when she messaged me, reminded me that there is a museum now in honor of my great-great-grandfather, that Florida senator who hid my great-grandfather. She reminded me that he was a wealthy man. She reminded me that none of that ever came to my family. What does it mean? To be in right relationship from the perspective of those who have experienced the trauma. Now, having said this, there has to be this radical commitment to healing. That healing has to be possible. We have to acknowledge that healing is possible. We have to acknowledge that we can establish this sense of beloved community, as Reverend King implored us to, this notion of beloved community. We have to imagine that we can accomplish better things. We have to imagine that our actions can produce the kind of right relationship we must all have to thrive. We must imagine that together we can get past all of the pain of these kinds of traumas and establish a new kind of community in which everyone truly is honored for the gifts that they have to offer to build a strong sense of community. We have to imagine that this is possible. And yet we have also to understand that there has to be the right kind of process. Because if we don't have the right kind of process to do this and to build this kind of community, then we will be laboring in vain. Now, sometimes people come up our way and they will have community meetings and they say, we're going to build community. I heard a comment last week from a gentleman from one of our government agencies, and of course he's raising up the work that's been done in our most immediate neighborhood, the Hill District in Pittsburgh, which is where we come from, the Hill District, predominantly black community. Although, you know, it was before 1958. There was one urban planner I talked to at Carnegie Mellon who was of the professional opinion that it was the most integrated neighborhood in the United States of America at that time. In his cynicism, he also went on to say that's why he believed it was dismantled, especially at the height of the civil rights movement. It sent the wrong message. You can't have black folk living together with white folk, getting along and all that. We have to dismantle this. Up in the Hill District, though, you know, we've had certainly our challenges like many other communities. We've seen a great gain. And this gentleman from a government agency, he was very impressed with this very recently. And he said in a meeting with other government folks, he said, well, you know, as Father Paul reminded us, we have seen a lot of strides in the Hill District because of the investment there. Now, when he said that, I want to tell you, brothers and sisters, he misspoke. he misspoke. This idea that we're just going to take money and put it in the Hill District and everybody's going to be fine is foolish. It's not that simple. Part of the problem is we are able sometimes, if we have resources, to move faster than the community that's been through so much trauma. Sometimes it's like you've got to slow down. Right now, we're involved in a very large project, partnering with the city of Pittsburgh, the final kind of area of our neighborhood that we really need to give attention to, some of the oldest public housing projects in the United States, Bedford Dwellings. We got Choice Neighborhood Grant from HUD, $50 million to help now bring new housing. But what the point of it is, we don't want to lose. We're determined not to lose any of the families, but should they choose to leave, who are currently there. And yet, what I can tell you is, because there's so much money coming so quickly, people with the money want to move faster than the time it takes to build relationships. Relationships make plans possible. And yet, how many plans do we have without relationships? How many plans do we have that relationships aren't even considered? And what does it mean to move at the pace of relationship, to build relationships in communities where there is this extraordinary amount of trauma? And for good reason. Sometimes people will say, I will hear them say, why are you upset about slavery? It ended in 1865. I should tell you that's not that long ago. My grandfather, when he was born, there were still Civil War veterans walking around his little town. And I knew my grandfather well. I grew up with him. It's not that long ago. And yet, what always astonishes me about that particular context, you're so angry about slavery, is that there's so much that happened since slavery that continues to happen. We can talk about COVID and the disproportionate death rates. And we can talk about how those disproportionate death rates not only impact people's ethnic background, but really, if we were to say in community, where was there higher death and hospitalization rates, we would have to also acknowledge that those communities that are formerly redlined communities, that we know now, we can make a connection statistically of where these death rates are. This is not ancient history. These experiences that we have, as it pertains to the healthcare system, you know, there was a gentleman from one of our healthcare systems who said something to me very, very profound. And he said, you know, a lot of people are talking about how many people of color are killed by police, but if we're really honest, the healthcare system has killed so many more. And I knew he was right. We're not talking about 1865. We are. We're also talking about 2024 and engaging people who have been through these kind of challenges, these kind of traumas, these kind of experiences. It takes time. It takes patience. And more importantly, we've got to raise up leaders, honor leadership. Now, here I want to make a distinction between capability and capacity, because we sometimes treat capacity as capability. We sometimes treat it, well, they don't really, you know, we can't really have them do this because they're not maybe able to do it. We can't really have them do that. They're not prepared. One time I had a woman tell me, Father, your gifts are just to stay with the people. Quit getting involved in all this kind of bigger stuff. Just stay with the people. That's what your gifts are, is what she told me. What she was really saying is, leave the big stuff to us. Stay in your neighborhood and mind your own business. That's what really she was saying to me, as I understood it. But I want to tell you that sometimes it's not because people cannot do it. It's that people, they have the ability, but they just don't have the capacity. They don't have administrative assistants. They don't have CPAs. They don't have a staff of 100 or 200 or 300, but they have the ability We have to make this distinction between capability and capacity and understand that sometimes the right thing to do is to build capacity so that people with capability can be the leaders they have been created to be. We have got to honor, raise up, develop leadership in our communities. Mr. Walter, you know what? There were so many times when we were at Selby Garden yesterday. We were at Overtown yesterday. We were at Newtown yesterday, and he would tell me the stories. And you know what he would say? He would say, and you know what? We did that. He would tell me about the school boycott. And let me say something that was very profound about Mr. Walter, the story that he shared with me. When he experienced integration, forgive me, Mr. Walter, for sharing a little bit of your wisdom that you shared with me, but this notion of what does it mean when the schools were integrated. Mr. Walter told me yesterday, well, we had our own star quarterback. We had our own drum major. We had our own leaders in various parts of the school, but when the schools were integrated, we were never the leaders. He told me of the boycott of the schools. We'll have freedom schools. He told me how that boycott hurt the schools that were paid by the student, and that, I guess, compelled a change of heart. And he drove me by that beautiful school in Newtown and said, if it wasn't for what our people did, the sacrifices that they made, we would never have had that school. And then people say, well, we can't find any leaders. Well, who killed the leadership? Literally and figuratively. But I will tell you that our efforts to develop leadership become extremely important. The resources that are committed, the expertise that's willing to share, that we're willing to share, the work that we're willing to do, raising up the core of leadership in communities that have been inundated with trauma, that leadership, that emerging leadership, I assure you, will bring with it a sense of community healing. Communities cannot heal without that kind of leadership emerging from community. We talk about being trauma-informed. We talk about empowerment, voice, and choice, and this must be personified in communities that have had their leadership decapitated over now generations. And when we see that leadership emerge, and we have to understand that unless we are doing everything we can to develop and support emerging leadership in these communities, unless we are doing that, we are part of the trauma. It is never a right to speak in behalf of another human being, ever. It is only ever a privilege if that is the role that we must play. But everyone has a voice for themselves, no matter what that is, no matter how that's expressed. And our commitment to hear and listen and raise up and lift every voice that sings. Unless this becomes our work, then we are deceiving our good intentions. So the process matters. The person has to be at the center of it. And I will tell you that with this, we must learn how important it is to demonstrate that we can be trusted. Well, I'm going to tell you something. It's one thing to say that I hear you, but it's another thing to show up with resources when somebody says, I need something. Nothing says I hear you like that. Well, brothers and sisters, there's much work certainly to do. I'm not giving any answers here this evening other than to hopefully encourage some deep reflection. We all can do better. We all can be more. And I want to tell you that I believe that the stakes are very high right now. I have seen too much in my young life to know otherwise. I remember studying in 2000 in the University of Aleppo in Aleppo, Syria. And I remember at that time, everybody was saying, this is the most stable Arab country in the region. And the kind of civil war that Syria experienced after that time was unimaginable. I want to tell you that I've been to the Holy Land. And never could I have imagined that now we would see this level of death and destruction and the level of uncertainty with a conflict that now is spreading across the region. I want to tell you that I served as in the United States Army and crossed into Iraq the very first day of the ground war in March of 2003, a war that should never have happened. And I want to tell you that I had a command sergeant major who said to us before we crossed the border, this isn't Vietnam, this isn't World War II, this is Iraq. And the only thing I need from you is 5 good days. 5 days, and it'll all be over. I want to tell you, I've seen too much in my young life to know that things are not certain for us in the future. We are at a crossroads now. And who shall we blame for this? Maybe this politician or that politician. Maybe we can blame this party and that party, but we have ourselves to blame, not only for what we do, but for what we do not do. For there comes a time, as Martin Luther King said, when silence is betrayal. So will we betray our neighbors is the question. Will we betray our descendants is the question. Will we betray our beloved nation that is right now at a crossroads? But I will tell you, just as we could descend further into chaos and trauma and hatred, we could ascend together to glorious heights. That together we could have a country where every child receives a good education. That together we could have a country where health care isn't just a privilege, but that everyone has access, where we have healthcare workers on every corner of every community. We could have a country, brothers and sisters, where guns are not our norm, shooting each other is not our norm, but speaking together is our norm. We can have a country where we are known by the way that we love one another, not fight with one another. We could have a country that is a place of great beauty, great beauty. We could have a country where people will say, go there and you will learn what it means to have resilience. We could have a country where every community is a community in its truest sense. We could have a country where everyone is free to offer their gifts to build the future of America. We could have this country. And today is the day in which that future is determined or not. It is a great joy to be with you in this city of Sarasota, in the great state of Florida. It is an honor and privilege to stand with you, not as a stranger, but as your family. For we have indeed easily become family. It is a blessing to bring my children among you, for they are enriched and nurtured by you. And I'm grateful that I carry you in my heart. For in this I have tasted glory. That God bless us and guide us. And may we achieve these glorious, seemingly unattainable, and beautiful heights together. Amen.
Thank you, family. Oh, thank you, Father Paul. Helen, where are we? Okay. Is there anyone here who would like to ask Father Paul a question? And I mean a question. Let's not talk about how great agencies are. Let's not go on and on about a long story. Let's ask some questions.
Daisy? Okay, Daisy's here. If you need interpretation. She's here for you. Prefer to ask your question to her and she'll interpret for you. Oh, okay, you can speak. All right. Just making sure everybody got their stuff heard. All right. So questions? You can stand in the end of the aisle. Oh, I think they might have matched it off. See if it buttons. It's that one. Oh. That one's on. There you go. There you go, Fran. Mm-hmm.
Both of those? Okay, here you go. I'll hold it for you. I have too many microphones. Okay.
I think you heard. Deep respect. Thank you very much for being here and to everyone who made this possible. Thank you. On a practical question, the metrics that determine if your framework has helped the communities involved, how do they measure those changes in resilience due to the framework? Thank you.
Well, so thank you so much for asking Dr. Hamilton that question. And this is where I want to be, forgive me, I didn't get very specific in my remarks, did I? I didn't. Forgive me. Well, so this is where I want to say that I don't want to talk about building resilience in a theoretical sense. There's a lot that we know about resilience. There's a lot that we know about well-being. There's a lot that we know about health. And part of the question that I pose is, how is it that we are measuring the impact of what we do on community health, well-being, and resilience? Generally in our work, we talk about resilient, healing, and healthy community. Now, I want to say that we mustn't just say that as though it's like some kind of phrase, some kind of tagline, resilient, healing, and healthy community. In our work, we believe very much that you can and should measure that. I have often thought, can you imagine if our public subsidies, and there are many public subsidies that are fueling development in communities. We have to be honest about that. Can you imagine if those tax incentives were tied to the impact of those investments on community health and well-being, if they were tied to the impact on resilience in community? There's so much that we know about resilience that we have to be able to measure it. Now, in our work, we've been very determined to do that, and that's why whenever we set out to do this, again, surprisingly, we were unable to locate any sort of tool that enabled us to do that. How do you do this? How do you do this? But what I've learned is that you just got to get the right people in the room and pose your challenge and say, we've got to figure this out. And we had this wonderful collection of academicians and researchers, folks from the School of Health and Information Sciences at the University of Pittsburgh, community members with this extraordinary wisdom and lived experience. And we put everyone together, beginning with a literature review about what is really available to measure this. And what we developed is an integrated health assessment system. We call it I Am Healthy. Now, at that particular time, what was very, very interesting was the Rand Corporation was in our neighborhood, and it was just very interesting because they said, well, look, here's how this goes. If you have $300,000 in 18 months, we can get you the results. Now, you've not been to my, let's say, previous church or ministry from where we were now, but at that particular time, you would not have walked in and said, well, that priest got $300,000. You would not have said that. And indeed, we did not. And we thought the other thing about that is doing these studies after 18 months, you have this data that's released that's already outdated. Because what happened over these 18 months? Maybe some people moved. Maybe some people moved in. Maybe some people this, some people that. Now, at that particular time, we became engaged in this conversation to look at how to remedy this. And what we decided was, if there was a way to use technology this was the goal, to turn the average community member into an analyst. Why am I going to pay the RAND Corporation to do this study over 18 months and get outdated data when we could develop some kind of integrated health assessment system that I could equip a community member with to punch a button and get real-time data? Why would I do that? And in fact, what we from the literature review decided to take a look at was a way to measure integrated health of the person, the household, the block, and ultimately the neighborhood. And we can segregate the data across those 4 sectors. We're looking at certainly those kinds of elements of physical well-being and resilience. Nothing surprising there. Obviously, we're looking at some kind of a measure of mental health, well-being, and resilience. You know, what kind of, what is the attitudes, perspective, what kind of coping strategies, et cetera, et cetera. We're looking at socioeconomic, because I'm going to tell you something. A woman said to me one time, "Father, I don't like my psychologist." I said, "You don't?" Yes. He told me I'm depressed. She said, I said, "You disagree with the diagnosis?" She said, "Yes, I'm not depressed. I just need to pay my light bill." And that's so true. Because sometimes it's like you're depressed. Some of the interventions we have with some of the, I want to tell you some of the work that we've done with schools, and we want to do this about academic performance, which of course I strongly support academics. We want to do this program for youth, these kinds of things. But if somebody is gunning for you, what good is your intervention? You want to take away the anxiety? We want to give him a pill because he knows there's a hit out for him? Oh, give him a pill. He's got anxiety. This is a misunderstanding of the situation. Well, we want to take a look at socioeconomic, those socioeconomic factors that are resilience and impact well-being. We also want to take a look at relational health, because there are good relationships and bad relations. There are healthy relations and bad relations. There are some relations and there are no relations. There are people who are, I remember I was talking with a USAID worker, and he said what was so fascinating, he was in West Africa during the Diamond Wars, and he said, "I witnessed an entire village be displaced, move into a refugee camp, and keep their social infrastructure completely intact." And I thought, I have seen people who are not only impoverished, but they are radically alone. No relationships. We have some of our friends that were doing a social network analysis, because we do this as part of the social network analysis. We want to see who are the influencers, how many connections are. We map the community out in terms of what is the network. You can map this out. We can do this with technology. And we have a map that we see. And we have some colleagues in Columbus, Ohio, and they were telling us that we're doing this using this health assessment system. They said, the first time we did this, it was unbelievable. We had people who basically had no one. See, we have to measure that. And last, spirituality. It's funny because, and that's not just obviously I'm wearing a collar, but that came from a literature review. That wasn't Father Paul, the clergy, that said that. That was people who have expertise in this. That spirituality, it affects meaning making. It affects transcendence. These are the kinds of things that are resilient. I thought about my grandmother, that I mentioned, I referenced a few times over. You know what? Forgive me, my dear people. No one ever taught her yoga. No one gave her mindfulness classes. Do you believe that? But I'm going to tell you something. She had this deep spirituality. In other words, we understand this as a component of resilience. In all of this, we have an algorithm that takes all of these data points and creates an integrated health score. And what we do is we look at the person, we then look at the collective household, then we look at the block, and then we look at the neighborhood. And then we, from the interventions and investments, we track that. And what we're going to say is this number better be going up as a result of everything that's happening. And I think that this really should now, not just our work, but I'm just saying this should be the standard. How should any of us settle? Can you imagine if we said, look, the goal, we're going to invest in this community. How do you know this community investment is going to be successful? Well, here's what we're going to say. We're going to say that as a result of this investment, resilience is going to increase, health and well-being is going to increase. That's going to be a successful investment for us. And I'm going to tell you something. If that's what we said, and those public subsidies were tied to that kind of measure, we would see improvements in our community. I strongly believe that. So I'm hoping this is that we can see a change in this regard in our communities.
Any more questions?
I'll try to make the other answer shorter.
So blessed to have been invited to be here. As I heard you speaking, I couldn't help but wonder and question when we speak community as our neighborhoods, but also how would you address community within our organizations and within challenging each other, because we do acknowledge high turnover rates, but how is that impacted? You mentioned violence in so many different ways, and I don't think that some of us realize that it's within our own agencies sometimes.
Oh, what an insightful question. What an insightful question. And here's where I want to say that, you know, sometimes we talk about, I don't know, maybe we talk about trauma, for example, as though it's not in our organizations, as though it's not in our staff, this issue of high turnover, and dealing with people who are in constant chaos, dealing with people in constant trauma, it takes certainly its toll. It takes its toll. You know what? I'm going to tell you something about self-care. And I have this. Sometimes people will say self-care is pampering. Pampering is not self-care. You get a massage. My question is, does that really fill your cup? Because this work is hard. You know, you say, I'm going to get a massage so I can go back in the neighborhood and do this all day. Is that what you need? You need a massage? I'm going to tell you something. You need more than a massage. Some of us have been doing this work know that to be true. Thinking really about self-care. Now, community in our organizations is absolutely imperative. I will tell you that for us, it begins with our own community. I know for sure that at the Neighborhood Resilience Project, if we don't have a strong sense of community ourselves in the truest sense, there is no way we're going to be able to build community or be any part of building community out in our broader communities. I know that to be true. The question becomes is, how are we intentionally building community in our organizations? And that has to be intentional. Now, one of the major aspects of this is, I want to say, constant convening. What does this mean? Well, we're all busy. Sometimes you're firing at all these paces. Sometimes you got to pull everybody in, and you got to say, we need to just get together, say hi to one another. We need to talk through one another. And whenever we have, you know, it's funny because we have staff meetings every Monday morning, and so sometimes people will come their first Monday at the Neighborhood Resilience Project, and they think, oh, I can't believe that this is a staff meeting because we didn't talk about business but the last 5 minutes of it. The whole first 25, it's only half an hour, the whole first 25 was all about value building. And it's gotten to the point where people, there's this whole section where I don't tell them to do this. People do this on their own. They stand up and they celebrate this one. They thank that one. They reward this one. And it sets this culture like we are really part of community here. And that has to be. We have to do that intentionally. And understanding when we are community and when we're not. And the final thing I'll say to that is, with this, we've got to be incredibly attentive to the slightest, I want to say, challenges in relations in our organizations. Because if we are not being attentive to that, sometimes there'll be like these big blowouts. Now here's what I know. Yeah, I know it started a long time ago. And when I ask about it, people are like, well, there was that one time, and then there was this, and they start saying all these things. Well, see, you got to be attentive to the little things over time. I would not ever recommend leaving just everybody in the staff to work things out, like, quote unquote, on their own. Sometimes we've got to mediate, we've got to foster, we've got to nurture, we've got to de-escalate. Can you imagine if we had people we have people that are trained, we have people that are trained to do this, trained to do that, but how many in our staff are trained in conflict resolution? I always think about the organizers. Some of you have been through the training. We have community organizers go through this training, that training, and it's very, very, I want to say aggressive, but where we're not trained is in conflict resolution. And conflict it just emerges constantly. If we do not have the ability to address it in our own staff, we certainly will be unable to address it in community. And with that, if the final thing I'll say, is this the second final thing I'll say? Second final thing I'll say, I really mean it this time, is that if we have chaos in our organizations, if we have anger in our organizations, if we have resentment in our organizations, envy, judgment in our organizations, we will take that out into community. We will feed that into community. So it has to be our first priority.
Okay, we have another question.
Hi, I'm from Pittsburgh, and
What?
I want to.
What's going on
Yeah,
here?
yeah,
Are
yeah.
you a plant? I'm asking, ma'am. Are you a
Go
plant?
Steelers!
Go
and-
Steelers. We're
Well,
hoping.
and we just lost Andy Russell. But
I know. Is this a question about the
I wanna
Steelers? I was
just-
waiting for one from Mr. Walter. I didn't know.
I just want to throw out a couple random things. So I was a young psychologist where I did some home visits, worked with kids in the Bedford dwellings like in 40, 50 years ago.
Wow.
I cannot believe people are still living in those structures and it's just being fixed up now. I mean, it was unbelievable
That's
back
right.
then. Well, one of my questions is, does the Pittsburgh Interfaith Impact Network still exist? I was involved with that. Did the Hill District ever get a grocery store? But my real question
really
is
know
this.
this stuff.
I'm kind of new in Sarasota, 8 years. When I have opportunities to be in Newtown, it appears to me that Newtown is a community. When I go to the big condo buildings here, the gated places, even the houses that are built like castles where you can't even really approach the front door. I feel like it's the affluent people who have less community. As people in your communities are getting, maybe more resilient, things are improving. Are people still wanting to engage in community in the same way, or are they putting up walls like, well, you got more stuff, you don't need people and relationships this much?
Well, this is a very exciting series of questions and comments, and so let me just go right on down the list. Yes, Bedford dwellings. Well, as bad as it was at that time, it's worse now, which of course is why we're thankful to say we got $50 million. It's going to be leveraged to bring, I think, an additional $300 million now to finally build new housing. It's an incredible challenge. The Housing Authority has not been easy to work with. We started out. See, you want to talk about trauma? We went through this whole thing, and there was a big sort of song and dance. Folks from HUD, Washington D.C. came up. It was funny. They told us HUD, Washington D.C. They said, "Listen, no marching bands." I thought, now who in the world put a marching band? Somebody must have done that they had to tell us not to give them a marching band. Anyways, they came up. We did a whole song and dance. Ended up getting this investment, and so we got a team up there using these strategies. We're just starting to roll them out. The day of the big Christmas party that we had to start building this new effort, this kind of new movement in Bedford dwellings, December the 17th, just this past December the 17th, the Housing Authority, City of Pittsburgh Housing Authority issued 30-day notices to 209 of 393 families. And you start to say, we mad about slavery? Am I mad about slavery? I'm not angry. From a place of peace, we must address these injustices. We had to fight. and none of them were evicted. But we had to fight. Is there a grocery store? There is a grocery store. It opened 3 weeks ago. Long, hard slog. But I wasn't coming down here until that thing opens, so just in case you asked that question. And then is PIN still in existence? PIN still is in existence. Yes. So I think, was that all? Did I get them all? Oh, the loneliness. Oh, so, well, let me say. So is there more community? So I want to tell you, one of the things that I've always loved, I live in the Hill, right? I live in the Hill District. It's my community. You know, it's my community. I'm raising my family there. It's our community. I love the Hill. And there is a strong sense of community there. What I love about it is, in my capacity, you wouldn't believe the people that I have seen over the years from affluent communities. I always think, why are you coming here? Well, because back where in my community, affluent community, that kind of help is a stigma. We can't. They come in with suits. I've seen them. Broke. You got to go to the black neighborhood to get help. They know. And you know what? We help them because that's who we are. Sometimes feel like people say, you got to be more like these affluent communities, but I remember these experiences. I think, I don't know, maybe they need to be more like us. But regarding the change in community, I would just tell you that violence has taken its toll. Because what happens is, you know, with gun violence since you know, the 90s, the gang wars, and what's happened since then, there's a fear. You know, like if a new neighbor moves into your block, people are oh, what do they bring them with them? You know, is there going to be some trouble as a result? There's this fear. Well, a lot of our work has been to, again, you know, we've got understanding that dynamic. We have to work to build those relationships, and and introduce people to each other all over again. In those kind of introductions, there's a right and a wrong way to introduce people and connect people. Connecting people is an intervention, and if we teach people how to do that properly, we can really undermine that fear, and that then builds it reestablishes that old sense of community that violence has at times undermined.
We're going to end the questions. Thank you so much for all your questions, and now I'm going to bring you back up to Andy.
Oh.
This has been an amazing evening so far, and we're not quite done with Father Paul, so I'm keeping him up here. But at this point, I want to remind everybody that the success of an event like this almost always depends on what happens after the event is over, right? So we have actually 3 goals for the coming year or two. One is to continue to build on and deepen and expand the incredible work that's already happening here in Sarasota that we hit on earlier. The second is to take this message to parts of our community and to community sectors that maybe aren't involved yet. And then the third goal is to activate the community involvement that Father Paul has been talking about in 1 or more, or 2 or 3, or however many neighborhoods. So that's kind of that's our vision for where we're going next. And we would invite you, if you have any interest in getting involved and helping and getting to be part of this movement, give us a call, contact us, or even better, come to the wrap-up and planning session that we're going to have on Friday from 3 to 5 at the Sea Alliance space on Orange Ave, where we'll actually start thinking about how do we take this message and get into action with it. The other thing I want to say is, if you know any other organizations or groups that are doing this work or want to get involved in this work and would like to be included as a catalyst organization and join this movement, please encourage them to sign up. There are cards out at the registration desk with links to how you can do that. And then also, please take some time to give us feedback on the event. On your way out, there are written surveys and a QR code where you can just do the questions directly online. So those are kind of the last details. But before we move into the actual closing, we wanted to give you just a little taste of some possible future directions. So where is Steve and Bethany and Wendy? Come on up here. Come on up here. This is Steve Fancher from All Star Children's Foundation. He's going to talk to us about the business sector. Bethany Ritz from Ringling Museum, who's going to talk about climate change and the disaster response sector. And Wendy Ingram from Dragonfly Mental Health, who's going to talk about academia. Okay?
Thank you, Andy. Good evening, everyone. My name is Fancher. I work with All Star Children's Foundation, and my title is Chief Development Officer. And as an organization, we help kids in foster care and families, and we have our campus right around the corner here at 7. Some of the words Father Paul said tonight really resonated with a lot of the work that we do as well. So thank you so much for your wonderful message tonight. And he mentioned something about how we integrate, and then how we collaborate, and then how we cooperate. And I think, as building a trauma-informed community, I think those are what we do. At All Star, we collaborate with SCC. I see you guys here tonight, Safe Children Coalition. But as a business sector in this community, really, like, who's not represented in this room tonight are a lot of people in the business community. And your question earlier about how do we build a community in our own organization, I think really resonates with why is this important to the business community? How do we build a community within our own organizations, whether it's child-serving organizations, higher learning organizations, whatever our organization may be, how do we build a community within that organization, and why does it matter? And I think the business community is a very important part of this movement of the Catalyst organizations to move into the community, to really focus on how do we build community from within, so then we can build community from without. So with that, if you have anyone in the business community that you would like to connect with, my information's right up there. Please reach out to me. You could text my phone, you can email me, you could call me, but we would really love to integrate more into the business community. So far, we've reached out to the chambers of commerce, we've reached out to individual businesses, small businesses, the finance sector, and we've already started some of this work with them. So please, I ask the community to join our community to do the same. Thank you.
I'm not as used to being up in front of people as Stephen, obviously, but my deep interest is in the impacts that we may see with climate change and disaster response, that when we have those kind of experiences, if we don't already have a culture that builds resilience, that will compound for every community. So that's my interest, that's my background, and if you have any interest in this way, I'm reaching out, thank you. I'm reaching out to different people who are already in this space, and if you have an interest to also be a part of that, please do reach out to me. I'm a public relations at the Ringling, writer, editor, background in media, obviously. I've got some in my media. But yes, I'm here for that.
So hi everyone, my name is Wendy Ingram, and I work with academics. I'm an academic myself, and one of the things that a lot of people don't know about the university folks, the faculty, the students, the staff, people who are training to become your doctors, your lawyers, your policymakers, involved in all of this amazing research and science, epidemiology, designing these wonderful things are for the world, and dedicating themselves to higher learning and art and culture and history. These are some of the loneliest people in the world. And the rates of depression and anxiety are 6 to 8 times the rates of the general population. And we're often, myself being one of them, are picked up from, we're given these amazing opportunities to go to places of higher learning, to study with incredible people with, tons of experience, but we're plucked from our communities, and we have to build those communities where we are, and then a few years later pick up and move again, and move again, and move again. It's a highly hierarchical kind of environment, and there's a lot of power dynamics, and a lot of people focused on our brains and what our brains can produce and do for others and for the world. And that's a lot of pressure that is felt by academics. That leads to a lot of historical trauma we may have come into our academic pursuits with, maybe some of the things that we wanted, that drove us to study medicine, to study science, to study organizational change. But we also experience trauma within the academic setting as well, without a lot of repercussions. So building community is an incredibly important thing for these wonderful people who come from all walks of life and then go back to their communities. So what we do with Dragonfly Mental Health is build connections, build community, build awareness, and decrease stigma. And those things are really important to do in a trauma-informed way, so that we can take it out and back with us and pour it into the research and the science and the medicine and the caring that we can do. So please, if you're connected to any of the universities or colleges around here, I would love to get more deeply connected. I've only been physically here for 2 years, but we would love to collaborate with anyone in professions or academic institutions around here.
So I'd like to thank those 3 people who just stood up here for their leadership. And I would say to the rest of you out there, if you have an area that you think we should be looking into, all you have to do is stand up and say, we should be looking at this area, and offer to take the lead. Okay, this is how it happened. Guys stood up and said, I care about this issue, let's do something, I'll take the lead. And that's, we're gonna see some great work coming in the next year. So to wrap us up today, Walter is going to introduce a song, and Father Paul is going to give us a call to action. And I'm not sure exactly what order that's gonna go in here. We didn't have the end of this as well scripted as the beginning. So Walter, do you wanna talk about the song, and Father Paul can do a call to action somehow?
Which one? She said. I'm stuck in the middle here. You're first. You know, them preachers like to have the last word. But you're going first this time. You go.
My good people, the intelligence, the talent, the love, the wisdom that is in this community knows no bounds. Today is the day that I pray our descendants will be grateful for. Today is the day that I hope my great-grandchildren will look back upon and say, they made good decisions. Today is the day that I pray they one day will give thanks to God for us in this hour of ours in which we joined with one another, sharing an unconditional and unstoppable love and thus us. May God bless our efforts, and may God be with you in all that you do.
Okay. So we're going to close with a song. And a lot of you may have heard a little controversy about this song. How many people have heard of it? Super Bowl? Yes. Well, this song is called Lift Every Voice and Sing, and over the years it's became known as the Black National Anthem. It was written by James Weldon Johnson. He is a Floridian from Jack. He wrote it in 1871, I think. Yeah, I remember that. He wrote it as a poem. James Weldon Johnson was a lawyer and an educator, and obviously a poet, also an author. He was the first black to be admitted to the bar in the state of Florida. His brother took this song in 1899, took the poem in 1899 and turned it into a song. NAACP adopted it later in the 40s, 50s, I believe, and that's where it became known as the Black National Anthem. There's 3 or 4 verses to it. We're just going to sing the first verse, and I believe the words are going to be on, right? If you guys want to stand. And our